Well, very warm welcome to everyone. I thought it might be worth just starting by saying, in case there's anyone here who doesn't really know what the Central Sussex Climate Network is, its kind of mission statement is that we are groups and individuals from Central Sussex joining together to take action on the climate and ecological emergency, to develop resilient communities. And it's communities that we're going to be focusing on this evening, how to enable change within our communities, tackle the challenges that face us in relation to climate change and biodiversity loss. And we're very grateful to Brian for offering to lead this session today. As a local resident, Brian has set up Burgess Hill CAN, Community Action Network, which I expect many of you will have heard of. And the emphasis there is on empowering the local community. And in his professional life, Brian looked at that on a larger scale, supporting cities across Europe, I think, to reach their carbon neutral goals through his work for European funded Climate Innovation Agency, which has a slightly challenging title of EIT Climate-KIC. And I don't know, Brian may want to say more about that. Anyway, I'm going to hand over to Brian, and with the aim, as we said before, that we'll go into the breakout groups at about 8 o'clock. So over to you, Brian.
Fantastic. Thank you, Scilla. Thank you, team. It's a pleasure to be here, and really good to be having some time together to explore this thorny question of how do we take action. So it's really good to be here. I know it's another Zoom call. It's late in the evening, and I'm sure, like many of you, like me, have been probably on a number of video calls already today, or busy doing things. So I'll try and go gently and steadily, and try and make this as effective as possible. So what I'll do is I'll just share my screen. I've got a few slides and images to just kind of help us kind of navigate through this topic. And I guess this came about because on the last call we were talking about action, and I offered to kind of, I guess, provide some thoughts and some ideas from what I'm doing professionally and what we're doing to a certain extent in Burgess Hill as well, as maybe some helpful input into this question we all have, which is how can we act? So hopefully you're seeing my screen. Good, excellent. So maybe a little bit about me to start with. So yes, indeed, I'm a local resident. I live in Burgess Hill, 3 children and a lovely wife. And we've been here about, I've been here about 18 years. My wife's actually born in Cuckfield, so she's a local resident. And the picture on the right hand, the bottom right hand corner there is more kind of professional view. Like I'm sure many of us on the call as well, we live these kind of double lives of being local residents, but then also doing other things in our professional lives, our working lives. Although of course many working life is at home looking after children or running local businesses. So I guess it's quite a mixture. But for me, I've spent the last 15 years working with cities across the world on the topic of sustainable development. And more recently, in the last 5 years, as Scilla mentioned, I've been working on climate change for the European Commission, for an agency whose task is to kind of accelerate the development of innovative solutions and ideas to tackle climate change. So I've had the great privilege of really coming across some fantastic innovations, some great thinkers along the journey, and I've learned, I guess I've learned quite a bit, but also recognize that there's a lot of questions still, and this is a journey we're all feeling our way through. So if you're expecting lots of answers to the questions tonight, then I'm afraid you might be bitterly disappointed, because I'm very good at asking questions and hopefully providing some provocative questions, but actually the answers are generally need to be answered by ourselves in our own situation, in our own context. And I hopefully can provide some stimulation and some ideas and some pointers, But I think, you know, that, and that's the reason for structuring this with breakout groups, is actually it's really through discussing these things together and thinking about our own local villages, towns, streets, that that we can uncover action. So just as a reminder, not that I'm sure many of you do need it, but just to kind of remind ourselves about the scale of the challenge or the scale of the opportunity, depending on how you look at it. So here we are now. Be sure to wash your hands and all will be well. Trying to struggle our way through COVID-19. The worrying prospect of a recession as a result of the huge spending on COVID-19. But also, I guess, I think sometimes this picture has shown Brexit in the recession wave as well, or maybe it's another wave after COVID-19. And of course, you know, on the right-hand side there, the climate change kind of challenge is looming large, although for many it doesn't feel very real, depending on what part of the world you're in, of course. But I'm sure because you're on this call, you recognize it is real and it is something we need to deal with. So these things are coming. And again, just kind of share with you some images that I found useful on the journey, kind of getting a sense of the scale of the challenge. So this picture here on the right hand side where it says 2018 down here on the right, this is a graph really showing you the carbon budget, as it's sometimes called. So this is how much carbon we can use or still remain to use if we're going to keep within certain thresholds of 1.5 degrees or 1.75 degrees. So that black line at the bottom there is the carbon budget if we're going to stick within 1.5 degrees. And that tall, long column on the left-hand side is how much coal reserves there are in the world. And then you've got, of course, oil reserve and gas reserves as well. Hopefully what you can see from this picture is that there is an enormous amount of reserves already that are known that we can't use. Because if we do, we're below the budget. Not just 1.5 degrees, but 1.75 degrees and higher. And this is sometimes called the carbon bubble. And I guess it's the kind of answer to, well, this is why we shouldn't be fracking, or this is why we shouldn't be exploring for more oil or for more gas, or doing anything to promote the use of fossil fuels, to be funding fossil fuels, because we already have way more fossil fuels than we can possibly use. And some might say, well, what about carbon sequestration? You know, what about absorbing more carbon, Brian? Isn't that possible? But we're so far from having that technology in any proven or any scalable way. That would be a huge risk to think that we can carry on using fossil fuels. So I think this is an important graphic to kind of show the scale of, you know, of challenge we have in terms of keeping in the ground, as you also have heard a few times. Another picture, and this is from Climate-KIC, which is the organization I work for. And for 10 years, we've been funding innovation. And there's some fantastic innovations that we have been supporting. But a lot of innovation is what we sometimes call incremental innovation. It's an improvement on an existing technology or an existing way of doing something. In a way, the electric car is actually an incremental innovation. You know, it's replacing fossil fuels, but you're still traveling around in a car, in a vehicle, albeit electric. It's definitely a great improvement, but it uses a lot of carbon to build that car, and there's still carbon involved in transporting electricity, and even with renewables, there's still an element of carbon being used. So it's an incremental improvement. And much of the innovation that we've seen and that we've supported, and that's now currently being deployed, is incremental innovation. And that's great, but as this picture shows, if we carry on a pathway of incremental innovation, we will unfortunately miss our target quite significantly in terms of where we need to get to, where it says objective there. And that's 2 degrees, not even 1.5 degrees. So the challenge is, what we believe needs to happen is we need to do what we call a systems change. So we need to think about systemic changes. So sticking on the kind of car analogy and the electric car, that means, for example, actually cutting out completely using the car or reducing it to a minimum and walking and cycling instead, living near where you work, shopping within a 15-minute walk, for example. You know, you might have heard the term the 15-minute city. That's quite popular these days. The idea is that you can get everything you need, pretty much 90% of what you need, within a 15-minute walk. So how do we create communities where most of what you need you can get within a 15-minute walk? And that's about changing the system. So, you know, complete changes of systems. Same with food, for example. We can make meat more sustainably. We can introduce more sustainable foodstuffs. But actually reducing your diet, changing your diet completely can change systems radically. And that can get us to our target. So this is kind of a fancy picture, I suppose, of saying the same kind of thing, incremental to transformational. So it's kind of thinking about how do we change systems? That's one of the big questions for us, even locally. And the way we're thinking about systems change is to think about you know, reframing the challenge. What is the purpose, if you like, of the system, and its method? So you know, if the purpose is transportation, you know, is there a different way of doing transportation? Is there a way in which we can change the power structures? Who has the power over decisions, rules, legitimacy? Citizen assemblies, I would say, is one of the concepts which kind of tackles, you know, the kind of power structure issue. Who's making decisions? How are decisions made? Resources. How can we make new resources available? In a way, this call right now we're having is where we're thinking about us as a resource, us locals working in our villages and our towns and in central Sussex. We can make a big difference in terms of changing the system. Bringing in knowledge, bringing in information, bringing in technology, these are all different resources. And relationships. So creating new relationships in the way that we organize our lives and how we work and how we play. And I'll come back with an example near the end when we come back after our breakout groups to show you an example of a program we're running in Edinburgh, actually, which is looking at changing the whole way urban development happens. Rather than being kind of urban developer-led or developer-led, actually having it as a community-led development project instead. So it's a way of changing the system. So I guess one of the things that brings us to is Sussex. So that's kind of a big picture, if you like, of where we've got to in a few minutes in terms of the kind of what's been happening globally in terms of the thinking. What I'd add to that as well is that even kind of in the corridors of power in Europe, where we talk about you know, lots of policies and funding going into climate change, one of the big issues is citizen engagement, or actually citizen empowerment. So we're all familiar with the idea of citizen engagement, and many of you on the call as councillors are doing exactly that and playing a very important role at being that bridge between citizens and the council in terms of decision making, and seeking to engage better with citizens. What we're recognizing is that actually we need to go beyond engagement, and we need to go to empowerment. And what that means is we need to try as much as possible to devolve decisions down to communities and to give them more tools and more information and more capability to actually take charge of decisions themselves. And that's quite challenging for some authorities, because that of course indicates that there will be a shift of power from existing structures to new structures. And I think that a great example of where this is happening is in Madrid. So the city of Madrid a number of years ago created a new way of engaging its citizens, which was to say, we're going to put 10% of the city budget, 10%, we're going to put the decision making for 10% of the city budget into the hands of citizens. So, you know, there's many hundreds of millions of euros spent by the city of Madrid every year on various things, schools, roads, the usual kind of infrastructure and activities. And they created Madrid Decides is the name of the platform. And literally, you know, amount of budget is allocated, people can submit ideas, and then they facilitate a way in which citizens can vote for the ideas they like the best. What's very powerful about the platform is people begin to learn about what are some of the trade-offs and what are some of the decisions that need to be made. You know, do we retrofit schools, or do we build cycle lanes? Do we spend money on information projects, or do we, you know, how do we spend this money? What's the best way of us spending this money? And what's important for me as a citizen of the city, and what's important for the wider good. So it's a good way of getting people involved in the decision making with a small amount of budget where they really can make decisions. So there are a number of tools coming forward which are quite exciting to kind of enable that empowerment. So back to Sussex, and in terms of the scale of the challenge, one of the things that, if you like, concerns me, and one of the things that kind of really started drawing me more into the local scene, because I must admit, up until literally a year ago, I wasn't really paying much attention to what was happening locally. It was the Northern Arc development in Burgess Hill that really got me thinking. It's like, wow, that's a lot of houses that's going to be built in Burgess Hill, 3,500. I thought, oh, I better start paying some more attention to what's happening locally. And so, you know, over a number of months, I've begun to kind of, you know, talk to the Mid-Sussex Council, talk to local people, get involved in groups like this, and started to read some of the policies. And this policy stuck out to me because of these words where it says, you know, sustainable development should, where appropriate and feasible, according to the type and size. I mean, the words afterward look great to me. Minimize energy use, explore opportunities for renewables. There's some really good stuff in there, but I thought, hang on a minute, where appropriate and feasible, according to the size, isn't that a huge get out clause for anybody who finds it slightly difficult to do this kind of sustainable design and construction? So in light of this, of the kind of scale of the challenge and the need to do systemic change and the need to empower citizens and all of the things I've mentioned so far, when you actually come down to a policy like this, you think, this doesn't quite sit right with me. So I know this gets constantly updated. It also worries me that the policies point to some report, a sustainability report, which was published in 2011. So I think there's also a kind of a speed of update that's a challenge here in terms of council. And I know Mid-Sussex Council are, I'm sure, doing the best they possibly can. Their resources have gone down enormously over years. They've got a lot of challenges. So, and these are not easy answers. So please don't think I'm pointing the finger. I guess I am a little bit, but I also think the fingers point back to us as well. It's like, well, what can we do to help the council with their mandate as well? Now, the other thing to mention is that, you know, that's kind of one of the challenge areas I see, you know, kind of policies and ambition, if you like, of the council. But actually, there's a lot of fantastic things going on locally as well. And I've just picked out one example. So there's a company called Naked Energy, and they're an award-winning company at solar thermal and solar PV. And this is an example of an innovation they brought out, which has now received multi-million euros of funding. It's one of the projects that we supported at Climate-KIC, and it's gone on now to get lots of private funding. And they're just kind of starting to scale up now the production. But it basically, as you can see here, you can actually put the solar panels on the side of buildings and on flat roofs. Doesn't have to be on pitched roofs. It's super efficient, fantastic technology, and it's from Crawley. So I like that one because, oh my gosh, they're based in Crawley. Who'd have thought in our backyard there's this kind of world-leading solar technology company? So there's a lot of great stuff happening locally as well, and there's a lot of great expertise on this call now and all around us. I'm astounded at all the people I meet locally who are working in all sorts of exciting places and doing exciting things. So I think there's lots of potential when we work together. So the question of this session is, so actually, what do we do? Well, you know, where do we start? I think that was on the last call. That was kind of some of the questions people were asking. You know, if I think about some of the topics, when we think about climate change, there's retrofitting our buildings. There's sustainable transport, I mentioned earlier on, you know, cycling, walking. There's reducing food consumption. There's resilience, so flood, for example. How do we reduce flood runoff? There's information campaigns. How do we make people more informed? How do we kind of change behaviours? How can we work with our council to be more ambitious? How can we bring in some of these technologies? You know, these are all things we want to do, need to do, can do, should do. But actually, I think the questions for us are, one of the most important things for us is to think about our community and actually what are the issues facing our communities. So what I've been trying to do in Burgess Hill, and when I set up Burgess Hill CAN, it's a community action network. So I on purpose actually didn't use the word climate because I think if we're going to tackle climate change, we also have to tackle all aspects of our community. Because actually, you know, people are not really that interested in climate change. It's not, I mean, some are, we are on this call, but for many, it's not the top of their agenda. And in a way you could say, well, why should it be? But there are many things that are top of their agenda that are absolutely in tune with climate change. You know, people are concerned about health and well-being. People are concerned about air quality. People are concerned about wildlife. People are concerned about overdevelopment. They're concerned about congestion. You know, these are all things that actually can be solved with some of the measures that we know need to happen to tackle climate change. So in our breakout groups, the questions I suggest that we discuss together, and hopefully you saw the homework, the pre-work message that was sent out, which is actually for your local community where you are. You know, what are the things that people say they're concerned about? You know, what's the chatter? What are the things that people say on the doorstep, or perhaps on Facebook these days? And let's start there. You know, in Burgess Hill, you know, things like the state of the town centre is a major issue, and the amount of houses that are being built in Burgess Hill. And you know, both those issues, you could argue they're kind of gold dust for tackling climate change. You know, actually reinventing a town centre that is going to take you to zero carbon is a great opportunity. So I say to some people that although it's really sad to see the state of Burgess Hill, and it's frustrating that nothing's happening, you could say, wow, what an opportunity to build it, to rebuild it in a way that's, you know, in line with where the direction we want to go in. And it's fantastic to see the Scrapless store and the repair cafe in Burgess Hill, because those are the kind of retailers you think, yeah, more of that kind of thing is taking us in the right direction. So yeah, what do you see as the barriers, but also what do you see that potentially is happening now that people are interested in, people are getting involved in, that we could potentially build upon and work with. So I hope I haven't gone over too much of my time, but we're now into kind of breakout groups. I don't know whether we've got time for any questions before we go into breakout groups, or whether we should just go straight into breakout